There are moments in life when destiny speaks in whispers so soft, we mistake them for coincidence. And there are moments when it roars like thunder, shaking the very foundation of pride and bringing the mighty to their knees. This is a story of both. It begins not at the beginning, but at the crossroads where past and present collide, in a mansion of marble and glass, where a billionaire lay dying, and the only person who could save him was the woman whose heart he had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Her name was Adana, and as she stood at the golden gates of his empire, her hands trembling with herbs and memory, she asked herself one question: can a heart that was broken ever truly heal another? The answer, my friends, would change both their lives forever. For this is not just a tale of love lost and found. It is a testament to the truth that what we throw away in arrogance, we may one day need in desperation. And sometimes, the poorest among us carry the richest medicine of all. Let us go back 5 years to a time when Adana was just a girl of 22, living in the rolling green hills of Enugu, where the morning mist clung to the earth like a grandmother's embrace, and life moved to the rhythm of seasons, not schedules. She was the daughter of Mama Nene, a widow who sold vegetables in the village market, and the granddaughter of the late Mama Obiageli, a woman whose knowledge of roots and herbs had saved more lives than the village could count. Adana had inherited that gift, the ability to read the language of plants, to know which leaf would cool a fever and which bark would mend a wounded soul. Her home was modest, a small clay structure with wooden shutters that caught the afternoon light, and inside, bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling like nature's chandelier. She spent her days grinding roots with a mortar and pestle, mixing remedies for neighbors who came with ailments both visible and hidden, and her evenings sitting by the stream that ran behind her home, watching the water flow and wondering if life held something more for her. Not wealth. She had seen how money poisoned men's spirits, but perhaps love, the kind her grandmother used to speak of, where two souls recognize each other across the noise of the world. She was beautiful in the way that cannot be painted or photographed, a beauty that came from the inside out, smooth, dark skin that glowed like polished mahogany, eyes that held kindness even when they had seen hardship, and a smile that could make a stranger feel like family. But Adana did not know her own worth. How could she? The world had taught her that girls like her were meant to be invisible. And then, like a storm no one predicted, Chike Okafor arrived in her village. He came in a convoy of black SUVs, dressed in a suit that cost more than most families earned in a year, his wrist wrapped in a watch that caught the sunlight and threw it back like a challenge. Chika was 28 years old and already a legend in Lagos, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire in real estate and tech, a man whose face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "From Nothing to Everything" and "The Golden Boy of African Business." But what those magazines did not print was the shame he carried like a scar, the memory of the barefoot boy who once begged for scraps in the streets of Onitsha, who wore torn clothes and watched wealthier children pass by with contempt in their eyes. Chike had clawed his way out of poverty with a hunger that bordered on rage, and when he finally tasted success, he made a vow. Never again would he be associated with lack, with struggle, with the indignity of being poor. He had come to Enugu on business, scouting land for a new development project, but his expensive car broke down on the dusty road near the market, and while his driver worked on the engine, Chike stood there, uncomfortable and out of place, as villagers stared at him like he was a creature from another planet. And then Adani appeared, carrying a clay pot of water from the well, and without a word, she offered him a cup. "You look tired, sir," she said simply, her voice soft and unafraid. Cheek took the water, and as their fingers brushed, something shifted in the air between them, a recognition neither could name. He stayed, not just that day, but the next, and the one after that. He told himself it was because the project required his presence, but the truth was something else entirely. The truth was Adana. For 3 weeks, Cheeky returned to that village, as if pulled by an invisible thread. He came in the evenings when his meetings were done, parking his car far from her home, so as not to draw attention, and they would sit together beneath the old mango tree by the stream, talking as the sun melted into the horizon. Adana showed him a world he had forgotten. The taste of roasted corn, bought from a street vendor. The sound of children laughing as they chased fireflies. The peace that comes from sitting in silence with someone who does not need you to perform or prove. She spoke about her grandmother's wisdom, about how every plant had a purpose, how the earth provided if you knew how to listen. And Chike, for the first time in years, felt something crack open inside his chest, a longing he had buried beneath ambition and designer labels. He did not tell her he was a billionaire. He let her believe he was just a businessman from the city, someone passing through. And in those stolen hours, he became the man he might have been if pride had not consumed him. They fell in love the way rain falls, inevitably without permission, soaking everything it touches. Adana loved him with the wholeness of a heart that had never been broken, and Chike loved her in the way a drowning man loves air. He made promises under that mango tree, promises of a future, of a life where her hand would be in his, of days filled with laughter and nights filled with peace. He kissed her by the stream as the stars watched, and she believed him, because why would a man lie about love? But back in Lagos, a storm was gathering. Chika's mother, a woman hardened by her own years of poverty and determined that her son would never slip backward, made a discovery that sent her into a fury. She hired someone to follow him, and when the photographs came back, images of her billionaire son, sitting beneath a village tree with a girl in a faded wrapper, she summoned him home with a command that could not be ignored. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed, throwing the photos across his marble dining table. "Do you know what people will say? What the board will say? You're about to close deals worth billions, and you want to bring a village girl with no education, no family name, no connections into this world. She will destroy everything we have built." His business partners echoed the sentiment. His lawyers warned him about image and optics. And then there was Nkem. Beautiful, sophisticated Nkem, daughter of a senator, a woman who moved through high society like she owned it, a woman whose family controlled government contracts that could triple Chiki's wealth. She had been pursuing him for over a year, and now his mother and his advisors presented her as the logical choice, the only choice. "Marry Nkem," they said. "Secure your future. That girl in the village is a distraction, nothing more. Give her some money and move on. Men like you do not marry down." And Cheek, standing in his glass tower overlooking Lagos, felt the old fear return. The fear of being laughed at, of being seen as less than, of being dragged back into the poverty he had escaped. He looked at the life he had built, the empire that bore his name, and he made a choice, not with his heart, but with his pride. He returned to the village one last time, and Adana knew the moment she saw his face that something had changed. He did not sit beneath the mango tree. He did not take her hand. Instead, he stood at a distance, his posture stiff, his eyes avoiding hers, and when he spoke, his voice was cold, stripped of the warmth she had come to cherish. "I have to be honest with you, Adana," he said, and each word fell like a stone into still water. "What we had, it was never going to work. I have a life in Lagos, responsibilities you cannot understand. You are a sweet girl, but we are from different worlds. I should not have let it go this far." Adana felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Chike reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick with cash, and held it out to her. "Take this. It should help you and your mother. Consider it compensation for my time here." The word hung in the air like poison. Compensation, as if her love was a service rendered, as if her heart was something that could be purchased and discarded. Adana stared at the envelope, then at the man holding it, and she saw him clearly for the first time, not as the gentle soul who had sat with her beneath the stars, but as a man so consumed by fear and pride that he had become a stranger to himself. "I do not want your money," she said quietly, her voice shaking but firm. "I never wanted your money. I wanted you. But I see now that the man I loved does not exist. Or perhaps he does, and you have simply chosen to bury him." She turned and walked away, leaving the envelope in his outstretched hand, and she did not look back, even as tears streamed down her face. Chika stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear into the fading light, and somewhere deep inside, a part of him screamed that he was making a mistake. But he silenced it, climbed into his car, and drove back to Lagos, back to the life he thought he wanted. That night, Mama Nana found her daughter weeping by the stream, her shoulders shaking with a grief so raw it seemed to tear the air itself. The older woman said nothing at first. She simply sat beside Adana and held her, the way mothers have held their daughters since the beginning of time. When the sobs finally subsided, Mama Nana spoke, her voice low and steady. "My child, I know your heart is broken. I know you feel as though the world has ended. But listen to me carefully. A man who cannot see your worth is not a man worthy of your tears. He's a man still learning, still stumbling in the darkness of his own fear. You, my daughter, are a light. You carry your grandmother's gift, her wisdom, her strength. Do not let his blindness dim what you are." Adana wiped her eyes, her breath still hitching. "How do I stop loving him, Mama?" she asked. "How do I make this pain go away?" Mama Nana smiled sadly. "You do not stop, my child. Love does not work that way, but you will learn to carry it differently. You will transform this pain into purpose. And one day, when destiny calls, you will understand why this had to happen. Destiny, you see, is wiser than pride, and life has a way of bringing us back to the places we thought we left behind." Adana did not believe her mother that night. How could she? But she held on to those words like a rope in the darkness, and slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild herself. She threw herself into her work, studying her grandmother's old journals, perfecting remedies, traveling to neighboring villages to help the sick. She became known not just as a healer, but as a woman of quiet strength, someone who had survived heartbreak and emerged not bitter, but deeper. 5 years passed. She never married. Her heart, though mended, still bore the scar of that first and only love. And she told herself that was enough, that a life of purpose could fill the spaces where romance once lived. While Adana grew in wisdom and grace, Cheek's world was crumbling in ways he could never have predicted. He married Nkem in a ceremony that made headlines across Africa, a $1 million wedding with champagne towers and imported flowers, celebrities and politicians filling the pews, cameras flashing as they exchanged vows that felt more like business contracts than promises of love. But behind the golden facade, Chike's marriage was cold and hollow. Nkem was not cruel, but she was calculating, more interested in the status of being Mrs. Okafor than in the man himself. Their conversations revolved around investments and social appearances, never about dreams or fears or the things that make a soul feel seen. Chike told himself this was normal, that love was a luxury and partnership was what mattered in the real world. But late at night, alone in his vast bedroom, he would think of a girl by a stream, of a smile that had made him feel human, and he would wonder what he had traded for this empire of glass and loneliness. And then, as if fate were determined to humble him completely, his body began to betray him. It started with chest pains, sharp, sudden jolts that took his breath away during meetings and left him gripping the edge of his desk. Then came the irregular heartbeat, the dizziness, the moments when his vision would blur and the room would tilt. He consulted the best cardiologists in Lagos, flew to London for second opinions, traveled to Houston to see specialists whose waiting lists were months long. They ran every test, studied every scan, and finally delivered a diagnosis that changed everything. A rare hereditary arrhythmia, a condition so uncommon that most doctors had only read about it in textbooks. "We can manage the symptoms with medication," Dr. Emeka told him, his expression grave. "But your condition is progressing. What you need is not just management, you need a cure. And I am afraid that Western medicine does not have one." Chike grew weaker with each passing week. The man who once commanded boardrooms with effortless authority now struggled to climb a flight of stairs. His empire continued to grow. His executives handled the day-to-day operations, but he was disappearing from his own life, fading like a photograph left in the sun. Nkem's concern was performative at best. She worried about how his illness might affect stock prices, about what people would say if he appeared frail in public. There were no gentle hands to hold his, no soft words to comfort him in the dark hours of the night. He was surrounded by luxury and utterly alone. One evening, as he lay in his hospital bed, after yet another collapse, Cheek's mind drifted to a memory he had tried for years to bury. His grandmother, a small woman with weathered hands and knowing eyes, who used to make him drink a bitter herbal tea when he was a child. He had hated the taste, but his grandmother had insisted. "This will keep your heart strong, my son," she would say. "Our family carries a weakness in the blood, but the earth provides the cure." He hadn't thought about that tea in decades, had dismissed it as superstition once he entered the world of modern medicine. But now, desperate and running out of options, the memory returned with startling clarity. He called his assistant, a young man named Obinna, who had been with him since the early days. "I need you to find someone," Chike said, his voice hoarse, "a traditional healer, someone who understands herbs, old remedies, the kind of medicine that existed before hospitals." Obinna nodded and began the search. It took weeks, consultations with village elders, phone calls to remote communities, following leads that often ended in dead ends. And then, one afternoon, Obinna returned with a name that made Chike's world stop. "Sir," he said carefully, "there is a healer in Enugu. They say she is the best in the region, that she learned from her grandmother and has cured illnesses that baffled doctors. Her name is Adana." The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony that bordered on cruelty. Chike lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, as the weight of that name settled over him like a shroud. Adana, the girl he had loved and destroyed, the girl whose heart he had broken with an envelope of cash and words soaked in cowardice. The girl who was now, impossibly, his only hope for survival. He wanted to refuse, to find another healer, anyone else. But Dr. Emeka had been blunt. "If this woman has the knowledge you seek, and you refuse her because of pride, then you are choosing death. The choice is yours. And so, with a humility that tasted like ash in his mouth, Chike sent Obinna to Enugu with a message. A man in Lagos was dying, and he needed her help. Obinna found Adana in her clinic, a simple structure she had built on her grandmother's land, where patients from across the region came seeking remedies that hospitals could not provide. When he explained why he had come, Adana's face went very still. "Who is the patient?" she asked, though something in her chest already knew the answer. "Mr. Chike Okafor," Obinna said. "He is very ill. The doctors say only traditional medicine can help him now. He sent me to ask if you would come to Lagos and treat him. He will pay whatever you ask." Adana stood in silence for a long moment, her mind a storm of memory and emotion. The man who had shattered her, who had reduced her love to a transaction, was now asking her to save his life. Every instinct told her to refuse, to let karma take its course, to protect herself from reopening wounds that had taken years to heal. But then she heard her grandmother's voice, as clearly as if the old woman were standing beside her. "A healer does not choose who to heal based on worthiness. A healer serves the gift, not the grudge." And she heard her mother's voice too. "Let him see what he threw away." Adana looked at Obinna and gave a single nod. "I will come," she said quietly. "But understand this, I come as a healer, nothing more. Whatever existed between us died 5 years ago." The journey to Lagos felt like traveling to another planet. Adana, who had rarely left her village, found herself in a city of glass towers and endless noise, where wealth and poverty existed side by side in brutal contrast. Obinna drove her through gates that seemed designed to keep the world out, up a driveway lined with imported palms, and finally to a mansion so vast and cold it felt more like a museum than a home. She was escorted through marble hallways hung with abstract art worth more than her entire village, past rooms that seemed to serve no purpose other than to display excess, until finally she reached the master suite where Chike lay. The room was filled with medical equipment, monitors beeping softly, IV lines running into his arm, the sterile smell of hospital disinfectant. And there, in the center of an enormous bed, looking small and frail, in a way that shocked her, was the man who had once stood tall and proud and broken her heart. Chika's eyes opened as she entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. 5 years collapsed into a single breath. She saw him clearly now, not the invincible billionaire the world celebrated, but a frightened man facing his own mortality, humbled by the very body that had betrayed him. And he saw her, transformed from the shy village girl into a woman of quiet power, her head wrapped in a beautiful veil, her shoulders straight, her eyes clear and strong. "Adana," he whispered, and her name on his lips carried the weight of 1,000 apologies. She moved closer, her healer's instinct taking over, and began to examine him with professional efficiency, checking his pulse, observing the color of his skin, asking questions about his symptoms in a voice that was calm and detached. Dr. Emeka, who had been standing in the corner, watched in fascination as Adana worked. "His heart," she said finally, "carries an imbalance that your machines cannot measure. It is genetic, passed through his mother's line. I have seen this condition before, in the journals my grandmother kept. There is a remedy, but it requires specific plants, harvested at the correct moon phase, and prepared with precision. It will take time." Chike nodded weakly. "Whatever you need," he said. "Please." Adana established herself in a guest house on the property and set to work. She sent detailed lists of herbs to Obinna, who arranged for them to be gathered from forests across the region. Some ingredients she collected herself, traveling back to Enugu to harvest roots from the sacred grove where her grandmother used to pray. She worked with a focus that surprised even herself, driven not by lingering love, but by something deeper, a commitment to her calling, a respect for the gift she carried. The mansion buzzed with tension during those days. Nkem, Chiki's wife, watched Adana with barely concealed hostility, sensing a threat she could not name. The woman was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was the way Chike looked at her, the way his eyes followed her movements, the way he seemed to breathe easier when she was in the room. "Who is she really?" Nkem demanded one evening, cornering Chike in his room. "Some village woman you dragged here. What could she possibly do that real doctors cannot?" Cheek did not have the strength to argue. "She is trying to save my life," he said simply. "That is all that matters." But it was not all that mattered, and everyone in that house knew it. The air was thick with unspoken history, with the ghost of what had been, and the possibility of what might be. Adana felt it too, the weight of Chike's gaze, the way he watched her prepare his medicine with something that looked like reverence. But she kept her walls high and her heart protected. She had come to heal, not to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The remedy took 7 days to prepare. A careful process of boiling, cooling, mixing, timing each step with the phases of the moon and the prayers her grandmother had taught her. On the 7th day at dawn, Adana brought the medicine to Chika's room. It was dark and bitter, smelling of earth and ancient wisdom. "Drink this," she instructed. "All of it. It will not taste pleasant, but your body will recognize what it needs." Chike drank without hesitation, his face contorting at the bitterness, and Adana stayed beside him, monitoring his vital signs, whispering prayers under her breath. For hours, nothing seemed to change, and then, slowly, his heartbeat began to steady, the irregular rhythm smoothing into something strong and sure. Dr. Emeka, who had been observing, could barely contain his amazement. The monitors showed what medicine could not explain. Chike was healing. By the 3rd day of treatment, Chike was sitting up in bed, color returning to his face, strength flowing back into his limbs. By the end of the week, he was walking the halls of his own home, breathing deeply for the first time in months, feeling his heartbeat with a power and regularity that had eluded every modern intervention. He was, by any measure, saved, and the woman who had saved him was preparing to leave. Chike found Adana in the garden one evening, as she gathered her things, and he stood at a distance, afraid to come too close, afraid of the words that needed to be spoken. "Adana," he said finally, and she turned to face him. In the fading light, she looked like something timeless, something the world had not yet learned to value properly. "I do not know how to thank you," he continued, his voice breaking. "You saved my life. After everything I did to you, after the way I hurt you, you came here and saved my life. Why?" Adana was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the horizon. "I didn't do it for you," she said simply. "I did it because healing is who I am. It is what my grandmother taught me. A healer does not choose based on who deserves mercy. Mercy is given freely, or it is not mercy at all." Chike took a step closer. "I was a fool," he said, and the words came out raw and unguarded. "I was a coward. I chose money and status and pride over the only real thing I have ever felt. I broke you because I was already broken inside, because I was so afraid of being poor again that I could not see I was becoming poor in every way that mattered. I have spent 5 years in a mansion, surrounded by everything money can buy, and I have never been lonelier. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw you away like you were nothing. But you were everything. You are everything. Tears streamed down Adana's face, not because his words moved her toward forgiveness, but because they confirmed what she had already known, that the man she loved had been real, that he had simply been buried beneath layers of fear and pride, and that pain, as brutal as it was, had been necessary for both of them to become who they were meant to be. "I am not angry anymore, Cheek," she said softly. "I was, for a long time. But anger is exhausting, and I chose peace instead. I chose to build a life that did not need your validation or your regret. I chose to become someone my grandmother would be proud of. You taught me something important, even if you did not mean to. You taught me my own worth. You taught me that I do not need to be chosen by a man who cannot see me clearly. I learned to choose myself." Chike nodded, understanding that this was not a moment of reconciliation, but of closure, of two people acknowledging the truth of what had been and what could never be again. "Is there anything I can give you?" he asked. "Anything at all? A hospital in your name, funding for your work, a partnership?" Adana shook her head gently. "I do not need your money, Chike. I never did. My work does not require wealth. It requires wisdom, care, and connection to the earth. Those things cannot be bought." She paused, then added, "But if you truly want to honor what I have given you, then live differently. Use this as a second chance, not to build more towers, but to build more bridges. Remember where you came from. Remember the boy who needed bitter tea to survive. And do not forget the people who still need that kind of medicine, that kind of care. That is the only payment I ask." With that, she picked up her bag and walked toward the gate, leaving Chica standing in the garden of his glass empire, a wealthy man who had just learned the cost of everything he thought he wanted. Months passed, and life returned to its rhythms, though nothing was quite the same. Chica filed for divorce from Nkem, a decision that sent shockwaves through Lagos high society, but freed him from a marriage that had been a prison. He began to dismantle the parts of his life built on ego and fear, redirecting his wealth toward causes that actually mattered. Clinics in rural areas, scholarships for village children, funding for traditional healers who carried knowledge the modern world was too arrogant to value. He didn't do this for recognition or redemption. He did it because a woman with herbs and wisdom had shown him that true wealth was not counted in zeros, but in lives touched and hearts healed. And then, one quiet afternoon, he drove back to Enugu, not in a convoy of SUVs, but in a simple car, alone and unannounced. He found Adana by the stream, where they had once sat together a lifetime ago, where he had made promises he did not keep, and she had believed in a man who did not yet exist. She looked up as he approached, and there was no surprise in her eyes, only a calm knowing. "I am not here to ask for anything," Chike said, sitting on the grass, a respectful distance from her. "I am not here to beg for a second chance or to rewrite the past. I just wanted to say thank you one more time, and to tell you that I am building a healing center in your grandmother's name, a place where traditional medicine and modern science can work together. You do not have to be involved, but I wanted you to know. You changed me, Adana. Oh, you saved more than my life." Adana smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I am glad you are finding your way," she said. "We all deserve that chance, to become who we were meant to be, even if the journey is painful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water flow, two people who had loved and hurt and grown in the spaces between. And when Chiki finally stood to leave, Adana did not ask him to stay, and he did not ask for more than she could give. Some stories do not end with lovers reunited. Some stories end with two souls learning what they needed to learn and walking forward, whole and separate and free. The sun was setting over the village as GK drove away, and Adana remained by the stream, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She thought of her grandmother, of the wisdom passed down through generations, of the truth that had guided her through heartbreak and brought her to this moment of peace. In the distance, she could see young girls from the village approaching, students she had been training in the art of healing, eager to learn the language of plants and prayers. She stood and brushed off her wrapper, ready to teach, ready to continue the work that was her purpose and her power. Somewhere in the fading light, she heard her mother's voice. Destiny is wiser than pride. And she heard her grandmother's voice too. A healer serves the gift, not the grudge. And in that moment, Adana understood that her story was not about the man who broke her heart or the billionaire she saved. It was about a girl who learned to heal herself first, who transformed pain into purpose, and who carried her grandmother's legacy forward with grace and strength. The world would tell many versions of this story, of a poor girl who saved a rich man, of a billionaire humbled by illness, of a love lost and lessons learned. But the truth, the deep and abiding truth, was simpler and more profound. That true wealth is measured not in gold or glass, but in the purity of one's heart, in the courage to choose mercy over bitterness, and in the understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to let go. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Adana whispered a prayer of gratitude for the pain that had shaped her, for the gift that had saved her, for the journey that had brought her home to herself. For she had learned what many spend lifetimes trying to understand, that a heart once broken can become a heart that heals, and that destiny, patient and wise, always brings us back to where we truly belong.